September 15, 1964. The golden light of late afternoon streamed through the windows of Romy Schneider's Paris apartment as two of Europe's biggest stars faced the end of what the media had called the love story of the century. For 5 years, Alain Delon and Romy Schneider had been not just lovers, but the most powerful partnership in European cinema, a combination of beauty, talent, and charisma that had captivated audiences across the continent. Their romance had begun in 1958 during the filming of Christine, when 19-year-old Romy, already famous for her sissy films, met the devastatingly handsome 23-year-old Alain. The chemistry between them was instant and electric, both on screen and off. Within months, they were inseparable, and their relationship became the subject of countless magazine covers and newspaper headlines. But by 1964, the fairy tale was crumbling. Both had evolved as artists and individuals, and the very intensity that had made their partnership magical had also made it increasingly volatile. Romy, who had grown from a teenage star into a sophisticated actress, was beginning to chafe at being seen primarily as Alain Delon's girlfriend rather than as an independent artist in her own right. The film industry, particularly in France and Germany, had begun treating them as a package deal. Producers would approach them together, expecting their relationship to translate automatically into box office success. While this had initially benefited both their careers, it had gradually become limiting, especially for Romy, who felt her individual artistic identity was being subsumed into their joint image. The breaking point came during discussions about their next film project. Alain, riding high on the success of The Leopard and positioned to become the dominant male star in European cinema, had assumed that Romy would continue to choose projects that complemented his career trajectory. But Romy had been offered a role in a challenging German production that would showcase her dramatic range in ways their romantic pairings never could. The argument that erupted that September afternoon had been building for months. Romy accused Alain of treating her like an accessory to his career, rather than a partner with her own artistic ambitions. Alain, genuinely confused by what he saw as her sudden change in priorities, couldn't understand why she would want to break up a partnership that was making both of them rich and famous. "You think I need you," Romy said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You think my career depends on being your leading lady, your beautiful companion at premieres, your other half in magazine photo shoots. But I'm an actress, Alain, not just your girlfriend who happens to be in movies." The words hit Alain like physical blows. For 5 years, he had seen their partnership as the perfect synthesis of love and professional success. In his mind, they were stronger together than either could be alone. The idea that Romy might not only want, but actually need independence from him was incomprehensible.
"We're perfect together," he protested. "The audience loves us. The critics respect us. We're making the best films of our careers. Why would you want to destroy something that works so perfectly?" Romy's response would be remembered as one of the most definitive moments in both their lives. "Because I want to know who I am when I'm not half of Romy and Alain. I want to know what I can achieve when I'm not limited by what works for us as a couple." What happened next shocked Alain to his core. Romy didn't just end their romantic relationship, she terminated their professional partnership entirely. She told him she had already signed the German contract and would be moving to Munich to focus on her international career. More devastating still, she informed him that she had instructed her agent to stop considering any projects that involved both of them. "I'm kicking you out of my professional life," she said with a finality that left no room for negotiation. "I need to prove to myself and to the industry that I can succeed without you." The rejection was complete and devastating. Alain left her apartment that evening feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. For 5 years, his personal and professional identities had been intertwined with Romy's. Now he was forced to confront the question of who he could be as an actor and as a man without her. The next 24 hours were among the darkest of Alain's life. He wandered Paris like a ghost, unable to concentrate on anything except the magnitude of what he had lost. Friends who saw him during this period later described him as looking completely destroyed and like a man who had lost everything that mattered to him. But somewhere in the depths of that despair, something began to change. As the initial shock wore off, it was replaced by a kind of cold determination that surprised even Alain himself. If Romy wanted to prove she could succeed without him, he would prove he could not only survive without her, but become something greater than their partnership had ever been. 48 hours after Romy's devastating announcement, Alain walked into the office of his agent with a completely new vision for his career. Instead of looking for another romantic leading lady to replace Romy, instead of trying to recreate the magic they had shared, he announced his intention to pursue a completely different type of role and a completely different kind of stardom. "I want to work with Michelangelo Antonioni," he told his stunned agent. "I want to work with Jean-Luc Godard. I want to make the kinds of films that will establish me not as a romantic leading man, but as a serious international actor." This decision was revolutionary for several reasons. First, it meant abandoning the safe, commercially successful romantic dramas that had made him famous. Second, it meant working with directors who were more interested in artistic experimentation than box office appeal. Most importantly, it meant reimagining himself as an actor who could carry films through the force of his individual presence rather than his chemistry with a female co-star.
Within a week of his decision, Alain had committed to starring in Antonioni's Legacies, a challenging psychological drama that would require him to convey complex emotions through subtle, understated performance rather than the passionate romantic style that had characterized his work with Romy. The choice proved to be inspired. Legacies showcased a side of Alain's talent that had been largely unexplored during his partnership years. Working opposite Monica Vitti, he demonstrated an ability to convey psychological complexity and emotional ambiguity that surprised critics and audiences alike. But Alain didn't stop there. He followed Legacies with a series of strategic choices that systematically dismantled any perception that his success had been dependent on his relationship with Romy. He worked with Jean-Pierre Melville on Les Samouraïs, creating one of the most iconic characters in film history, a role that required him to carry the entire film largely through silent, physical performance. Each new project seemed designed to prove a different aspect of his independence. With The Swimming Pool, he demonstrated his ability to create sexual chemistry with any co-star. With Borsellino, he showed he could hold his own opposite another major male star like Jean-Paul Belmondo. With The Sicilian Clan, he proved his commercial appeal in action-oriented material. Meanwhile, Romy was pursuing her own path to independence with equal determination. Her work in German and American productions was earning critical acclaim and demonstrating her range as an actress. But the media couldn't resist comparing their post-separation careers, and gradually a narrative emerged that surprised everyone. While both actors were succeeding individually, it was Alain who seemed to have been transformed by the separation. The vulnerability and romantic sensitivity that had characterized his work with Romy had been replaced by something cooler, more mysterious, and ultimately more compelling. Critics began noting that his performances had gained a depth and complexity that hadn't been evident during his partnership years. The transformation was perhaps most evident in his collaboration with Luchino Visconti on Rocco and His Brothers. In this epic family drama, Alain delivered a performance of such emotional power and psychological nuance that it established him as one of the premier actors of his generation. The role required him to portray innocence corrupted by circumstance, a theme that seemed to resonate with his own experience of having his romantic idealism shattered by harsh reality. By 1967, just 3 years after Romy had ended their partnership, Alain had achieved something remarkable. He had not just survived the separation, but had used it as a catalyst to become a bigger star than he had ever been during their relationship. His films were achieving both critical and commercial success across Europe and internationally. More importantly, he had established himself as an actor who could carry major productions entirely on his own star power. The vindication was complete when Alain was offered the lead role in The Leopard, Visconti's epic adaptation of Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa's novel. The role of Prince Selina required an actor who could embody both aristocratic elegance and profound melancholy, qualities that Alain's post-Romy career had perfectly prepared him to portray. The Leopard became one of the greatest films of the 1960s, and Alain's performance in it cemented his status as a cinema legend. The irony was not lost on industry observers. The role that made him immortal required exactly the kind of emotional sophistication and individual presence that his separation from Romy had forced him to develop.
The success of The Leopard marked the completion of Alain's transformation from romantic leading man to serious dramatic actor. International critics who had previously dismissed him as merely handsome were now praising his ability to convey complex psychological states through subtle physical expression. The depth he brought to Prince Selina, a character grappling with the end of an era, seemed to draw from his own experience of having his world fundamentally altered by Romy's rejection. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Alain's post-separation success was how it changed the entire landscape of European male stardom. Before their split, leading men in French and Italian cinema were expected to be romantic figures whose appeal was largely dependent on their relationships with female co-stars. Alain's independent success demonstrated that a male actor could become an international star through pure screen presence and dramatic ability. This transformation influenced a generation of European actors who saw in Alain's career a model for how to build lasting stardom based on artistic merit rather than romantic appeal. Directors began writing roles specifically for him that explored themes of isolation, moral ambiguity, and psychological complexity, characters that required an actor capable of carrying films through individual charisma rather than romantic chemistry. The film industry also began to recognize that Alain's post-Romy work represented a new kind of international appeal. His collaborations with auteur directors were succeeding not just in art house cinemas, but in commercial theaters around the world. This proved that audiences were hungry for more sophisticated entertainment than the simple romantic formulas that had previously dominated European cinema. Meanwhile, the media coverage of their respective careers became a fascinating study in how public perception can shift over time. Initially, entertainment journalists had treated their separation as a scandal, speculating about who was winning the breakup. But as both actors achieved individual success, the narrative evolved into something more respectful and nuanced. Romy's achievements in international productions were earning her recognition as one of the finest actresses of her generation, while Alain's transformation into a serious dramatic actor was being hailed as one of the most successful career reinventions in cinema history. Rather than being seen as competitors, they were increasingly viewed as two artists who had made brave decisions to pursue individual excellence. When journalists asked him about the transformation in his career, Alain was typically direct. Sometimes you have to lose everything you think you need to discover what you're actually capable of achieving. This statement became something of a philosophy that guided not just his career choices, but his entire approach to life. The man who had once been devastated by rejection had learned to see setbacks as opportunities for growth and reinvention. The separation that had seemed like a devastating rejection had actually been the catalyst for unprecedented artistic and commercial success. By forcing him to prove himself independently, Romy had inadvertently pushed Alain to reach levels of achievement that might never have been possible within the constraints of their partnership. His subsequent relationships with other actresses were notably different from his partnership with Romy. Instead of seeking to recreate the intense personal and professional fusion that had characterized their 5-year relationship, Alain maintained clear boundaries between his romantic life and his career. This allowed him to work with a wide range of talented women without the complications that had eventually destroyed his partnership with Romy. Years later, when both actors had established legendary careers, they would occasionally encounter each other at film festivals or industry events. The conversations were always cordial, even warm, marked by genuine respect for what each had accomplished. There was a sense that they both understood the role their dramatic separation had played in shaping their individual destinies. These encounters were often noted by entertainment journalists who were struck by the absence of bitterness or regret between them. Instead, there seemed to be a mutual acknowledgement that their painful separation had been necessary for both of them to achieve their full potential as artists. Romy had achieved her goal of establishing herself as a serious international actress, respected for her range and emotional honesty rather than her romantic appeal. Her work in films like The Cardinal and What's New, Pussycat demonstrated an ability to succeed in both dramatic and comedic roles across multiple languages and film industries. The lesson of their separation became legendary in the entertainment industry. Sometimes the most painful rejection becomes the catalyst for the greatest triumph. Alain's response to being kicked out by the woman he loved had not been to seek revenge or replacement, but to discover capabilities within himself that he never knew existed. In retrospect, the end of Europe's greatest love story had given birth to something even more enduring. Two separate cinema legends whose individual achievements ultimately surpassed anything they had created together. If this incredible story of rejection transformed into legendary success inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who has faced devastating setbacks and needs to know that sometimes the end of one dream becomes the beginning of something even greater. And tell us in the comments, have you ever had a rejection that forced you to discover capabilities you never knew you had? Because sometimes the most painful endings are actually the most powerful beginnings.